Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels, and sometimes I talk about some normal literature too, because it's all about the around the world as well as the weird itself. Today I'll be talking about a book that focuses on an Ethiopian immigrant, as well as a little bit about gentrification. I am referring to The Beautiful Things That Heaven Bears by Dinaw Mengestu, which was published in 2007. For those who don't know, Dinaw Mengestu is an Ethiopian writer who was born in Ethiopia, lived in Addis Ababa, and left the country shortly after the revolution, where the revolutionaries deposed Haile Selassie, and then there was a period of civil war, and then there's been some more conflict since then. But Dinaw Mengestu got out of there and grew up to be a writer. He's won a couple of awards for his work, and his most recently published piece of work was published in 2014. So I don't know if he's written anything since then, but I'd be more interested in checking out more of his work after reading this. He frequently writes about the immigrant experience in the United States, as well as what it means to be an immigrant, those topics like that, which you see in the book that I'll talk about today. This was a random library read, which I thought was funny because I had already read a couple of other books this year or short stories about the Ethiopian experience. The Shadow King and another short story that I forget the name of. So the big theme of this year seems to be Ethiopia. But without further ado, let's talk about The Beautiful Things That Heaven Bears. I will do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Beautiful Things That Heaven Bears focuses on Sepha, a Ethiopian immigrant who moved sometime after during the Ethiopian Revolution. His family his father was targeted by the revolutionaries for being a dissident, and they thought he was distributing flyers about democracy and whatnot, but it turns out that was just Sepha, but his father took the blame and they killed him for it. But Sepha moved to America, and he's been running a grocery store in a rundown neighborhood ever since, filled with people from many other different nationalities. It's a community of immigrants and people living in poverty in Washington, D.C. We meet two of his friends, Joe and Kenneth, who are from Kenya and Zaire, or the Congo. They both have okay jobs, although they both aspire to do great things, unlike Sepha, who is content with running his grocery store. At the beginning of the story, it's really a flashback because Sepha is reflecting on where his life has gone since meeting two important people. Judith and Naomi move in next door. Judith is a professor. She was studying or teaching in Chicago, but she's on sabbatical now, and she's moved to D.C. with her daughter, her biracial daughter Naomi, who is very interested in reading and is a pretty smart young girl. And over the course of the next couple weeks, or 5 months really, Sepha gets closer to Judith and Naomi. Naomi comes over to his store frequently, and he reads to her, acting in a very fatherly kind of role, which is important because Naomi's real father is a bit distant and doesn't come around at all. Meanwhile, he starts to develop a romantic relationship with Judith, but he seems unable to fully commit to pursuing that type of thing. In the present, we find out that he is being evicted from his grocery store because he doesn't really take the time to invest in it. He seems to be in a depressed mood because of what has happened to him pretty recently. But as the story flashes back, we see him developing more of that fatherly relationship with Naomi. He also considers how his father was killed during the revolution, especially for something that he had done. And then after that, he left to go to Kenya, and before making his way to America. Also, like, he lived with his uncle for a long time, and in the present, when he's in his depressed state, he briefly considers taking money from his uncle, like, without his uncle knowing, and he decides to not do that. Sepha reveals that he has sex with prostitutes pretty frequently, but at one point during the story, when he's still talking with Naomi and Judith, he decides against it. It's a choice on his part. At the same time, shortly after Judith and Naomi move in, like, a bunch of other people in the community begin getting evicted, and they all sort of lament that that these evictions are a part of gentrification, which is important because, like, Judith and Naomi bought, like, a big mansion, and the community is being changed ever so slightly so that the people who lived there first are being priced out now, and they're responding with anger and violence towards the people they feel are responsible, which is unfortunately Judith in this case. The community voices their concerns with Judith, and Judith just takes it and accepts it rather than trying to fight the community. She ends up sending Naomi to a sort of a private school in Connecticut as a means of raising her in a safer location, and also keeping her closer in contact with her husband, who she gets back with at one point in the story, but she later breaks up with him, or not really breaks up with him, but just sends him away, and she tries to get closer with Sepha at this point, but he's kind of distant. There's a rift growing between them that they don't really speak about. And then at a short while later, Judith's house just straight up burns down, and she gets ready to pack up and move away, having dealt with the fact that this community wasn't really for her anymore, that they weren't really accepting of her to begin with. And as the story ends, Sepha notes that like, he can choose to stay focused on this relationship that never was, or move on and stay or separate from that and focus on his grocery store again. He doesn't need to be torn between two worlds, as he notes. In terms of analysis, Mengestu does present a few things worth discussing in this story. The first thing worth noting is that it is, at its heart, a story about immigrants. Maybe not just one, maybe about many types of immigrants. But like, Sepha is the main character of the story, the protagonist. So we focus on how, like, he wants a better life in America, or maybe he doesn't want a life that's filled with so much strife that was going on in Ethiopia at the time. And it does seem to be a thing that happens for him. Like, he meets these two interesting people who fill his life with richness, Joe and Kenneth. He's able to pay for the necessities in life. If he struggles with rent, he's not immediately evicted, at least at the start of the story. And he meets Judith and Naomi, and is able to develop a strong bond with them. So things seem to be going well in America for him, and you would think, oh, well, this is something like the American dream. Like, it's a promise of a better world than the one you had lived with, that so many immigrants come to America to really enjoy, like, to really get away from and live a better life. But as we see, like, throughout the story, it seems like Sepha is disillusioned with America. Like, he sees the politicians as phony. Like, they don't actually live in Washington D.C. They live in the community surrounding it, and what's left with Washington D.C. is a community, at least in the 90s, not doing so well. It's struggling, and it's like, how can the people live like this? It's not a good situation. These people are being evicted. These people are going hungry sometimes. How can a country that has so much provide so little for its people? And at the same time, he reflects on Africa, with his friends. Like they seem to really love the countries that they came from, but they lament that their countries were taken over in coups, unfortunately, in part financed by the United States or the CIA, which I don't think they acknowledge here, but that's sort of an underlying kind of thing hanging over this story. I think they don't hate the countries that they're from. They're just sad that they've been taken over in coups, and a cycle of violence has been continuing ever since the 1960s in their respective countries. And so I think if anything were to get better, they would be more than happy to go back or something like that. Like maybe these people have been exiled from their countries rather than booted from it. And so they're in America as an exile more than anything else. And I really think like this highlights like an issue in this story about how like maybe the America is not like the better place that you want to be. It's more of the place that you have to be because of the situation that you're in. There's a good quote from this. Allow me to read it to you. In those days, I believed it was only a matter of weeks or months before I returned home to Ethiopia. I spent all my energy and free time planning for that. How was I supposed to live in America when I had never really left Ethiopia? I decided. I wasn't supposed to live here at all. And I find that quote very interesting because it shows that Sepha doesn't really want to live in America, that he's still connected to Ethiopia. And so we have to ask, like, is the American dream like something that is available for Sepha? And I think he was never promised, he was never sold an American dream. He moved to America because that was the only option available to him. Like, he couldn't live in Ethiopia anymore during the revolution, so he decided to go to America in the hopes that there would be something there for him. So not really knowing what to expect. So maybe he thought, like, maybe there might have been an American dream, but it wasn't his initial reason for going. So you can't be let down by America. When you're already let down, then you have to go to America. So this is a very interesting immigrant story in that it's sort of like America is representative of the exile, of you being torn between two worlds and unable to fully commit to either one, because on the one hand you have Ethiopia, which is in a violent revolutionary state, and America, which doesn't really view you as belonging there, and although there's opportunities, it's never going to meet like the same quality of life as your home, as where you want to be. Another element of this story worth talking about is the relationship between Sepha and Judith, or Sepha and Naomi. It's either romantic or it's fatherly, as in the case of Sepha and Naomi. A very interesting relationship where it seems to bring life to Sepha and give him purpose in America. Like, there's a weird part where he refers to Judith when she first moves in as a lesbian who's ruining the house. So maybe he's like in the same mindset as the other community members who don't want to see Judith like gentrify the neighborhood or something like that. But I do think it's weird that he just tosses lesbian out as a sort of slur against this woman, in a way that seems to make him look bad. And like, I know this was 2007, but it was still inappropriate to write that then. And so I don't know, it kind of ruins the relationship because it starts at that point. He never says it to her, but even thinking it is kind of weird. But there is some hope for what the relationship that Sepha and Judith and Naomi can have. Naomi can have the father who's not always there for her, and Judith can have the relationship that I think she's looking for, the love and someone to help her raise her child in a way that's positive and beneficial. But unfortunately, Sepha is unable to fully commit to this. Like, Sepha and Judith kiss at one point, but he never pursues anything further. And like Sepha is willing to be with Naomi, but that's only like in a I'll read to you kind of capacity. Like, he never attempts to have a closer kind of fatherly relationship with her, even though that's what the relationship is turning out to be. And at the end of the story, he notes that like he can write letters to Naomi because Judith will help him get them to her. And he was talking about how he was explaining the situation and how it's complicated and stuff like that, attempting to clarify for Naomi. But because he's unable to commit to this, he doesn't actually send the letters, which is a bit heartbreaking. One of the more heartbreaking elements of this story. But ultimately, I think all of this is related to his disillusionment. Like, he doesn't want to be in America, so he's unable to fully commit to his grocery store, to this relationship, to really anything here. Like, because to fully commit is to give up that life in Ethiopia of any chance of ever being able to go back. And like, if he accepts this relationship, that means he's here permanently, and that means he might have to be an American, something that he is more of a sign of exile for him. So, very interesting kind of mentality that Dinaw Mengestu has written here, and one that I haven't really encountered with many books about immigration before. Like, I can think of like Beautiful Country by Xi and Julie Wang, but that was more like all of America is bad. Like this, or my upbringing in America was bad. Like, she's not really in exile. Like, she was just brought to the country by her parents in the hopes of a better life, and she kind of had that. But here it's like he never wanted to be in America. This is more of a exile for him more than anything else. I also believe that this story is incredibly pessimistic, but very beautiful at times. Like, it has an extremely negative view of both Africa as well as the United States, because as one character notes, like, the 60s were the best time because people were marching and people were fighting for change in both Africa and the United States. But afterwards, coups took over. Afterwards, the politicians stopped caring as much. They didn't listen to the people anymore, and there doesn't seem to be any hope left for Africa or the United States, which is a really negative thing to say. And ultimately, I feel like this entire view of the book is pessimistic, that moving to America won't make things better for you, not only because of the culture of anti-immigrant sentiment, but also because the loneliness and the frustration that people have with the American dream is just going to grow too great. And what you end up with is a whole lot of sadness and a whole lot of misery. But in between that, there are points in this book where Mengestu writes very beautifully. Like, he really draws you in with the sadness, but also with the relationship that's developing between Sepha and Judith, and you really want to pull for them, but unfortunately it doesn't work out, but it's still beautifully written. However, outside of these great moments, this book does feel kind of empty at times. Not a whole lot happens. It's mainly Sepha reflecting on his life so far of leaving Ethiopia, but once he gets here, like, even when he's talking with Judith and Naomi, like, not a lot happens of substance in this story. It's mainly inside the character's head, but even those types of stories have things go on, something to drive the plot forward, and it doesn't really feel like Mengestu has that. I don't think it necessarily hurts the book, but it does leave me wanting more. Like, there has to be something of substance, something to keep me here, and it felt like I was just going through a book, just reading through it without being really truly invested in much of what was happening. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Beautiful Things That Heaven Bears by Dinaw Mengestu. A pretty good book, I would say. Pretty average in terms of substance and plot and pacing and all of that. Like, it's certainly a fine book. It's probably not going to be one of the best books that I read this year, but I am glad that I read it, and I do think it's funny that, like, a big theme of my 2022 seems to be reading books about Ethiopia. I hope I don't just keep checking out books at random from the library that are about Ethiopia. That would be a weird sort of running gag throughout the year. But I did enjoy it. I'm not going to necessarily recommend it to you out there because I don't think there's a whole lot to be gained from this, but it is an interesting book that if you want exposure to different cultures, maybe it's worth checking out from your local library. But otherwise, if you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about this interesting book. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this author and this book if they don't already know about those things or those people. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and grocery store owning travels. Farewell.